Hi, I'm Shanti, the artist behind Shanti Finance. Today I'm going to share the painting process of the Surreal Acrylic Painting with you. But before we get started, I want to mention a couple of things. Firstly, this was a very complicated painting because it has quite a few components going on there. So this painting video was getting very long. So I made it like super fast, so I couldn't go into great details on each of the parts of the painting. So it's not like your usual tutorial where I go through the step-by-step process. Also, I wanted to mention that this is not a typical step-by-step paint along with me tutorial, but I still wanted to present it in a tutorial way because I thought it could inspire you to make your own paintings, or you could learn the process of painting a few things that are the components that I have used in this painting. So let's get started now. I'm starting off with laying a general gray color all over the entire background, apart from the area that I have masked up with the masking tape that you can see. Inside the painting is going to be another painting, and it's kind of like a surreal theme where there is a painting inside a desert and that kind of thing. You will see as it slowly develops what exactly the painting is and what it means to you is up to the viewer's interpretation. But however, I started with laying down a general gray color in the background because my sky is going to be gray. Then I started sketching out the trees. I put one tree on either side and on one side I did a black and white tree, and on the other side I did a tree that had more color in it. It was kind of like a gradual transition from a black and white to color from one side to the other. That was a general idea. You can see that I am being extremely sketchy till this point because the initial idea that I had when I started this painting was to do just a sketchy underpainting with acrylics and then finish it off with oils. But then as I proceeded on and I started liking the way the acrylics were having a flat finish, and I decided, well, I will go on and continue with oil paints only and see where it takes me. So I just kept on going. But at this point, you can see that I'm in the entire painting, I'm being very sketchy. The ground, the trees, the background, everywhere, not really caring so much about blending, because at this point I was thinking that I'm going to come back with oils and that will help me get a much smoother blend. So now I am filling in the background wall area of the inside the painting. That's kind of sounds funny to me at this point, but you will see later what I'm meaning. And then there is a flower pot in there and a woman who's watering that flower pot. The idea is that the excess water that is trickling out of the flowering pot is going to come out of the painting and water this desert area, and that helps in growing this little purple flower in the desert. So it is up to viewers' interpretation what you want to think of this painting as, but I was kind of thinking about water conservation and environment when I was painting this one. So now you can see that I have decided, okay, I'm going to continue on with acrylics for the entire painting. So I'm working a lot more on the background, kind of smoothing it out. In the process, I'm losing a lot of the trees that I'm sketched out, but that's okay. I'll come back and define it much more later. Adding it a little bit of gray and white clouds in the background sky, and not trying to do too much on the clouds because that will take away the viewer's attention a lot, and that is not what my intention is. It's just so that the sky does not look very flat and looks more realistic. Added a little bit of cloud, but not a lot of definition because it's kind of like far away, so it doesn't need to be very defined. Now coming back with my black and white tree on the left hand side, I used a black, white, little bit of raw umber and some amount of blue. In fact, the black was the least amount that I have used, and for the very dark areas. Most of the areas I have kind of mixed blue and raw umber, or I'm not sure, maybe it was burnt umber that I mixed with blue and to get the black color, and then I mixed whites to get the gray. You can see that I am adding the darkest values first, and then doing a lot of mid-tone colors, 2 or 3 different tones of mid-tone colors, and then coming back with highlights. Although a lot of the highlights initially looks like I'm putting in white, but I have really used very little white for the highlights. Most of it is actually gray with more amount of white in it than there is the darker blacks or blues or browns, whatever I've used to make the gray with the white. So only for I always save the white highlights only for the least amount of very bright highlights, because it takes a lot of the viewer's attention. So wherever you put it, that is going to attract your attention. So want to keep it minimal at any point of time. Onto the next tree. Once again, this is going to be not going to be black and white, but I'm starting on off with very dark brown and sketching out the entire tree and establishing the darks first. Once the darks are established, I am coming back with the lighter colors, the mid-tones, and eventually I will put in the highlights and finish off the tree. You can see that I am doing a lot of layers. That is kind of very important for the way I paint. I like to paint in multiple layers because each layer adds in a level of depth, and in all they total combine and make it a very cohesive kind of painting, as well as add a lot of depth in the painting and make it look very realistic. I think if your aim is to go for realism, layers are something that you should definitely consider. Now on to the desert like ground area. I wanted to look like parched earth that has cracked and peeled, and that is what I was going for. So I kind of sketched out added a lot of sketchy marks, something like that you would draw in water ripples, and then came back and highlighted the inner areas with lighter colors. On to the painting inside the painting. Now I am kind of getting a nice yellowish looking color, although I'm smoothing out most of the background, but it doesn't need to be that smooth because what I'm going for is like an old yellow wall, so it doesn't need to look very, very prominent. Now on to the woman's face. I always try to first lay the very dark areas. So I drew a few dark lines first with purple. And yes, whenever I paint women with a little tan or dark skin tone, I like to do my shadows, the deepest shadows with purple. I think that kind of has a much better look, gives the faces a much radiant look than only brown or a black would. In fact, I try not to use black at all when I'm painting the faces, even if I'm doing portraits or like a subject matter like this. On to the hair part. I had already established the hair sketchily before, so and established the dark area. So I was coming back with the mid-tones first and then deepening my darker areas, because initially I had sketched it out with black, and I never leave any area just straight up black. I always like to glaze colors on top of black, because black is a very flat color. Wherever you put it, it kind of dulls out that area. So you don't want big areas of black masses. You want to glaze a lot of different colors on it. And if you like to know more about how to paint hair, I have multiple tutorials on it, which I will link down in the video description below, so you can check them out. And there I have given you much more details about how to paint dark hair, which I'm doing in this case. So onto the face, deepening the shadows and adding more midtones and highlight values. Onto the hair once again, where I am making the highlights more prominent. And once I make the highlight more prominent, I'm coming back with the darker colors in between and deepening the areas of darks and lights, because as I always say in every painting that I paint, no matter what medium, no matter what subject, I always like to hype up the contrast between the darks and lights, because that is what catches your attention. That is what attracts a viewer's attention and gives your painting that extra bit of pop. Onto the hand that is barely been seen. So once again, I always paint the darker areas first and then come back with the lights when I am painting with oils or acrylics. That is my general rule of thumb. Not that I never paint the lights or midtones first. Sometimes due to certain techniques or certain kind of painting that I'm doing, that makes it more intuitive. But in general, I paint the darks first on skin. Now onto the earthen pot. You can see that initially I had a brown color on the earthen pot, but then I deepened the shadows with lots of purples and blues and came back with a lot of grays. And after that I added some amount of browns, so to get a kind of cohesive depth in a lot of layers, the look of earthen pot. I wanted to kind of give it a very realistic look. Now onto the white dress. First I am establishing again the darker folds, the shadow areas with purples and blues. And once the shadow areas are being put, then I'm coming back with whites and grays in the folds of cloth to give the highlights. Onto the hand, I'm putting in the purples and the browns, again the darks first, and then coming back with midtones, and then finally with the highlights. And whenever I'm painting skin tones, I'm generally using a mix of some kind of yellow, red, and white, added with a little bit amount of blue to cool it down. And for the darks, like I said, for warm skin tones, I always like to use some purples for the shadows. Now onto the table. I'm trying to paint some wood grain here, but since this is a very small part, I'm not going into great detail with the wood grain. I'm just painting some sketchy lines and then coming back with some lights in between the dark sketchy lines and getting the feel of wood grains. Being sketchy in itself gets kind of the woody kind of looks, and I'm also paying close attention to where the darks and lights should be, the shadows and highlights should be. Onto the earthen pot, establishing the darks and lights once again. And in all of the painting, you can see that the colors that I'm using probably are not the colors that you see on earthen pot or wooden table. There's a lot of blues and grays and purples, but you will see that the shadows are in such a way that together they make a very cohesive painting. And that is what it's important. It is not what color everything is originally, or what color you typically think of as an earthen pot. It's a color that you see based on the lights and darks and shadows, and where the light is falling and where the light is getting reflected and where the shadows are. You get a very different color. Now I'm painting some leaves and I will add in some flowers in the flowering pot. Since this is a very small area of the painting, like about the total flower and the flowering pot is probably not even 3 inches, so I'm not adding a lot of details in the area. I'm just adding some darks and lights and values, creating some values. Now onto the water that is pouring out of the pan. This is a pot. This is probably the hardest part of the painting, to get the look of realistic water, get it to look like as if the water is really flowing, like getting the water ripples, getting the look of reflection of light in water. So what I did was I first added the dark line kind of marks, and then came back with some midtones, and then finally added some bright highlights. You will see that I'm letting the background show through, because water is supposed to be transparent. So no matter how much reflection is coming off the surface of water, how much light is reflecting, some amount of background will show through. onto the water puddle that is on the table. Here I am letting again the table show through a little bit. Now, once I did all that part, I took off the masking of the photo frame and put masking around the photo frame now to get very sharp lines, adding from bright browns and yellows first on the photo frame, and then again I'll come back and do some wood grain like look and adding some shadows that we would not normally see in a photo frame to make it look like a real photo frame. And masking off like this gives me a very nice sharp edges on my painting, which I will require to depict the photo frame. When I remove the masking tapes after the photo frame part is finished, you will see that how nice and crisp edges I get just because I'm masking this area off. Another quick tip here is if you see a little bit of seepage under the masking tape, you can always use a little bit of glazing fluid first and then use the paint. Then what will seep is the glazing fluid instead of the paint. Excuse me. Now adding some more water that is trickling down out of the painting. This was actually kind of motivated by a famous surreal painting that I saw on Pinterest, where there was a ship and the water was gushing out of the painting and the ship was about to fall out of the painting. So that kind of gave me this idea about this painting, getting the water to trickle all the way down to my flower and adding some nice details, some bright reflections, adding some blue tones as well to the water so that it kind of looks realistic, like you would see in a flowing water, kind of in a river or a stream of water, maybe a brook. Now for the flower part, I first drew out the flower with white so that I have enough opaque color underneath to put my other colors beyond it. Then I'm using a lot of blues and purples. And this flower, I have taken the reference photo from Pixabay. So it is for everybody to use the same reference photo, so you can always find that out. And added a lot of layers. I'm not going into the details of flower painting here because the video is already exceedingly long, but anyways, so that's the main part of the painting. And with that, I'm coming to the end of the painting. I will sharpen a few edges, get some more colors on the darks and lights of the leaves and grass area, and paint some little bit of straw around the flower, and well, that will complete the entire painting. If you like the painting and the video tutorial and you thought it was useful for you to know how I painted the different objects and made it come together, definitely give me a thumbs up. That is, like the video, and do not forget to subscribe so that you always get the notifications when I post a new video, which is twice every week. I hope you liked it, and leave me your comments and thoughts about the painting or the process, or if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. Thank you.